r/AskReddit. Flight attendants and pilots. What NSFW things occur during your jobs? NSFW. Not a pilot of FA, but I fly between 150 flights a year. One time I was flying out of a small Midwest airport to Dallas. I roll up to the airport restaurant bar to get a bite and a drink before takeoff. I notice this lady sitting by herself at the bar. A gentleman approaches her. They seem to be hitting it off, flirting, laughing, etc. Time comes to board the plane, and since this was on Southwest Airlines, it was pick your own seat. Naturally they sit next to each other. I am a few rows behind them. Flirting leads to touching, and then kissing. You can see that hands are wandering everywhere. By this point, I am not the only casual observer. About 3 or 4 other guys are looking and laughing. We all bond over their public display. It escalates to a point where she gets up to go to the bathroom. About 30-40 seconds later he follows. Apparently they thought that was enough time to be inconspicuous. As he approaches the bathroom she is already in. A flight attendant stands in front of him and says, "No, back to your seat." She knocks on the door and tells the lady to get back to her seat. All the observers are laughing at this point. The flight continues and she is practically mounted on him, doing everything they could possibly do while keeping clothes on. This continues until we land and all deplane. She quickly hurries off the plane. He is a few steps behind her, but she seems to be in a hurry. The other observers and I are talking about it and laughing as we exit the secure area into the baggage claim area. Then we see her, still several steps ahead of the guy, and she runs into the arms of her boyfriend and starts kissing him. Her flight guy just stops dead in his tracks, takes a couple seconds to observe, and then just leaves. I haven't laughed so hard in public with people I had never met prior to or since. Everyone is telling once in a lifetime type stories, but the most common NSFW thing that happens on airplanes is dudes falling asleep and getting noticeable boners. I was that guy once. Woke up with a blanket and when I thanked the steward he told me why I got the blanket. My flight director found a bag that was moving in the overhead bin. It turns out, it was a young girl in a bag, out of Port-au-Prince, Haiti. It was a ex-slave Haitian girl being sent to Canada. Edit. The security and the police were called. She was heavily drugged. No one knows who put her up there. I hope she is okay now. As a flight engineer in the AF flying out of an island in the Pacific, a sailor had fallen overboard and drowned. The Navy recovered his body a few days later. Since this is downrange, only a body bag is available, not a transport casket. Before takeoff the loadmaster comes to the cockpit screaming, yelling and babbling. He says the body in the bag is wiggling. Turns out eels have entered his body via his mouth and are wiggling within his body and causing the movement. Just a plain passenger, but this happened on my last flight. About halfway through, the pilot comes over the intercom and says please come out of the bathroom. Smoking in an airplane is illegal. Naturally, this gets the whole plane on edge. Turns out, it was an old woman who was completely naked and vaping in the bathroom while refusing to come out. They eventually had to break into the bathroom and take her out, which then caused the woman to try and fight the flight attendants. She was arrested as soon as we landed. Obligatory not me but a friend of mine disclaimer. I have a female friend who flies transatlantic as a flight attendant. She told me a story of how one of the passengers had been in the bathroom for at least 15 minutes. Being a busy flight, people were pissed off and complained to her that he had been in there for a long time. She went to the door, knocked a couple of times with no response. Obviously being concerned for this passenger's safety, the doors were opened. Inside was a guy on toilet, trousers around ankles, headphones in his phone with one playing and flaccid Pete in hand. Bro fell asleep while whacking it in an airplane toilet. Embarrassment ensued. My wife and I bought last-minute tickets to a family event and could not get seats next to each other. Once we boarded, I convinced the guy sitting next to my wife to switch seats with me. Nice guy takes my assigned seat, which was next to a woman who was apparently suffering from the flu. 5 minutes after takeoff, she projectile vomits, but tried to use a pillow to cover her mouth, which just made the vomit spray out sideways, all over the poor guy. He just sits there for a moment, frozen, and slowly turns back to look at me with this face that said, "You did this to me and I will forever hate you for it." I offered to buy him a drink but he ignored me. It was a 6-hour flight. A couple of our boys were on the return leg of an offshore crew change. 15 minutes out from the deck, they catch movement in the back. One of the passengers has unbuckled his harness and is getting up out of his seat. Big no on a helicopter. But before they can do or say anything, the guy grabs an Essex bag, drops his dax, positions the bag under his bum and lets rip. The bag lasted maybe 3 seconds. Explosive does not do this bout of diarrhea justice. Volcanic might not. If I hadn't seen the photos, I wouldn't have believed it. It coated the floor, his seat, the seats beside it and the poor sods in them. Splashed the windows and ceiling and row of seats behind it, everywhere. And the smell. The real kicker is that, even though they're only 15 minutes from the rig, they couldn't go back. If they did, the chopper would be stuck on the deck until it could be decontaminated by a cleaning crew. There's only one deck, so we'd have to send a second helicopter out to winch down said cleaning crew. A dangerous and expensive operation. Meanwhile, everyone due to come off swing in the next few days would be stuck on the rig until we did, while there wouldn't be enough beds in the town for the incoming crews. And the nature of the rig is such that it can't fully operate while there is a chopper on deck. Literally millions of dollars in lost production. One dude with a rumbly tummy he didn't tell the rig medic about because he was just that keen to get home. And several hundred people are, potentially, right up at creek. So, they take one for the team and push on. Tell the culprit to sit back down and put his harness back on and pray for a tailwind. 2 hours flying back to base. It's Australia, tropical and summer, and commercial helicopters don't have great aircon. The smell gets worse and worse, and it's not helped when some of the guys have to use the sick bags for their intended purpose. By the end of the flight, the pilots are all but flying with their heads out of the cockpit windows just a breath, and have given serious consideration to landing as soon as they were over the mainland, or any land. When they finally got in, it was approaching swamps of Dagobah level stank. Never had a disembark that fast, and you'd better believe the pilots did shut down in record. There was a queue for hoses. When the engineers started to do a damage assessment, it was even worse. That it was runny and grainy and found its way into every crack and crevice and bolt hole. The seats nearest to the guy were literally soaked in it and puke, and it was in the life vests and cabin raft. There was even splash in the cockpit. Everywhere. We had to fly in a specialist cleaning crew, the kind that normally does crime scenes, and fully strip and dismantle the cabin down to bare fuselage. In the end, the guy's seats and the seat of the guy to his right were so saturated, so caked and stained and soaked with his it that we had to write them off. Tens of thousands for replacement, plus more in maintenance and lost flying time. The guy in that second seat sat there, coated head to toe in his seatnuts it the entire flight without moving or saying a single word. Survey pilot here. Sometimes when I'm flying back and forth for 5 hours straight I need to piss in a bottle. One of my co-workers had his ick slip out of the bottle while he was going full bore, and he pissed all over the instrument panel. You should have heard his desperation on the radio. A couple weeks later, for our bi-monthly rotation, a new guy took his plane, and we didn't tell him that Greg pissed all over it like a moron. Ducking Greg. I was on a flight once, and when we got to cruising altitude, the pilot came on and gave us his speech about airspeed and weather at our destination. Blah blah blah. When he was done, I guess the mic stayed keyed up, because you could hear him talking to the co-pilot, kind of softly, like when someone accidentally butt dials you. You couldn't make out a lot of what he was saying. It was mostly beeps and clicks from the cockpit. At one point, he must have turned toward the mic and said to his co-pilot, clear as day, "Man, I sure could go for a cup of coffee and a blowjob right about now." So, everyone on the plane freezes in place and all ambient noise stops as everyone is thinking, did he just say so? A flight attendant starts to rush up to the front to let the pilot know his mic is still on, and she gets about halfway up to the front when someone yells, "Don't forget the coffee." I was a flight attendant for 6 years. Summer flights to party islands like Ibiza, Mallorca and Mykonos could get quite raunchy, like women boarding in fishnets, wanking and blowjobs at the back of the aircraft. Edit. By fishnets I don't mean just tights, I mean full body fishnets, no bra and the skimpiest thong you can imagine. Not me, but a friend who's a flight attendant who came across this really stubborn male passenger who wanted a sanitary pad that he saw the flight attendant hand over to a female passenger. convinced that it was an eye mask thingy you put on before sleeping. Arguing with her about it, she finally gave in and gave the sanitary pad to the guy, who coolly removed the anti-adhesive and stuck it on his eyes and went to sleep. This happened to another pilot at our company. We fly small planes with no doors between the cockpit and the cabin. We usually put our jackets behind our seats. A passenger sitting in the front seats could easily grab them without us noticing. At the end of one flight, he noticed that the passenger on the left front seat was sitting on his jacket. Very odd, but whatever. The passengers deplaned and he went to pick up his jacket. That's when it hit him. The passenger had taken a it on the seat, grabbed the pilot's jacket and put it over the it and sat back down on it. It was only a 20-minute flight. How badly do you have to go? Ducking, like and subscribe.